Today we'll be hearing from retired Officer Vanessa Wesley. She is a retired 29-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department and a consistent advocate for advancing youth development. She co-created and coordinated Bridging the Divide, a restorative policing strategy to authentically engage the community of youth and emerging young adults in the Chicago area. She has done some tremendous work in Chicago, and we are honored to have her here with us today to share a little bit about her work and the work that continues to be done in Chicago.
I'm so excited to be able to share this space with you today and hear more about you and about bridging the divide. So I'd love to dive into our first question. And that question is, first, please share a bit about how you utilize restorative practices as a police officer and how the restorative philosophy influences your approach to your work.
Thank you so much, Sydney, for having this interview and letting me be a part of what you're creating for the upcoming event in October. Wow, how do I use it? I can better explain that and how I became aware of restorative justice and the practice of. We were in 2014 as a department, we were realizing that we were touching and interfacing with young people of color at between the ages of anywhere from 13 to 25. And our process of doing that was not in its best. Of course, those situations where police are called are not the best. However, there's been, at the time, the Chicago Police Department was in a transition looking at our relationships, how we can do more collaboratively with community and those types of things. And we realized that we really didn't have a actual process. We really did not have a method to engage our community of youth. And what that did, it opened up this huge Pandora's box, and that nobody really honored the community of youth in such a way that they were equitably, efficiently, authentically engaged. I liken that to having a kids' table at the holiday. So what ended up occurring even before our tragedies of 2014, 15, and so on and so on, as a country, what we had to do was figure out how to do that. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to us, a community partner, another systems partner, the YMCA, their biggest concern, or one of the concerns with that group of young people, were they didn't see the police as their help. So it was one of those kind of conversations where they had to talk about decision making. Do I go back to the street life? My family is in this life. This is the only life that I've known as, growing up. I don't know how, or the threats that come with trying to leave those types of street organizations. And the question was asked, why don't you call the police? And the first response was like, oh, no, they're worse than the ops, right? And like, oh boy, they're the biggest gang in town. I'm like, ooh, that's not good. So partnering with them to address the needs of that small community of young people really became the map and model for what we call Bridging the Divide. And in that, we had to figure out a way to take the community members of police officers and young people and create a space where there was no judgment, there was an opportunity to repair harm, more importantly, a way to co-create strategies to move forward. So the amazing thing that came out of that is we tested it with a photo contest. And this photo contest was inspired by one of our juvenile justice judges, who's now retired, Judge Sheehan, and just a question that she asked her and her partner at the time: take pictures, or what do you see that represents strength and beauty in this community or in your community? So we partnered with them with the contest. And it was in that contest that we realized there was much larger work to be done. So we had to figure out how to do that larger work. And restorative justice entered into our conversations by way of Community Justice for Youth Institute, which is one of our leaders and anchor organizations of restorative justice practices and youth advocacies here in Chicago. And they were trainers. They were skill and capacity building organization. So I learned about peace circles. That was the first thing. And those peace circles became let me just digress a bit. The reason why we had to figure out a way was because our young people did not want to sit in spaces of conversation with police officers, adult police officers, and our adult police officers didn't want to have anything to do with those kids. And when I say those kids, the ones that are considered the problem kids, but change only comes by one conversation at a time. And if you're not in a space where you can be your authentic self and speak truth authentically, we'll never change. So we took the approach in an interventive or preventive space. How do we have these conversations of change? And peace circles came to be that way. So that's when I fell in. That's when the Chicago Police Department fell in. And everything around us began to grow. From there, at the time, my deputy director, Mark Payne, and his wisdom said that we as a department could no longer do one-offs. We had to look at a way of systemizing and changing the way that we approach the community of youth. So Bridging the Divide moved from that photo contest project, which was really successful. Nobody believed it. We had 260 plus, I think I played at this number. I have to find out the accurate number, over 200 submissions. And a good portion of those were submissions from police officers, which folks thought that would never happen. And when the turning point or the crescendo, if you will, it was when we looked at the photos and the officers and the young people were taking photos of the same thing. And that was when my deputy director at the time, Mark Payne, said, we have to use this. This is our opportunity to look at what we're doing differently and be able to plant a seed. And it was from there we created the process of Bridging the Divide, which it started off with the restorative justice practice of peace circles, because each side to this conversation needed a place to heal. Officers needed to heal, young people needed to heal. And when I say heal, some circles got deep, but we had to rehumanize one another. And the foundation of restorative justice being community is understanding who we are to each other, the connectiveness of who we are to one another. Even though you work in my community where I live, the best part of me is connected to the best part of you. So it's those foundational things that allowed us to create these spaces of safety for officers and young people. And when these officers and young people realized they had more in common than they had different, then we start to see the shift. We were very intentional that these were not one-offs, meaning we had a circle here, or we designed the follow-up to the photo contest where we mapped out a 10 to 16 week process, giving room for the circle to work its magic in the healing aspect. Then once there is a mutual relationship, now we're introduced to public participatory dialogue processes like World Cafe and Pro Action Cafes and those things from an organization called Wisdom Exchange. Melina Kramer, she was as we were designing this, it's like we were building this plane as we fly it. But the tenets and the principles of restorative justice goes through, and it flows through seamlessly through all three components, even to where we are now, what we're building now. I say I'm still connected, but what they're building now is the platform for authentic youth voice. One of the principles of restorative justice that I hold on tightly is inclusion and value. So when we are discussing things about young people, we can't have that discussion about them without them. So the third component of Bridging the Divide is the Youth Council. So everything that they healed from, everything that they co-created with their fellow officers, now they can see implementation and organization and sustainability within a place that has been built for their voice and the things that are important for them.
That's amazing, Vanessa. Thank you for sharing that background and just the integration of RJ and Chicago PD and Bridging the Divide and that beautiful connection that you've created. And it seems like it would be very difficult, especially given kind of the conversation of what you stated before of some of these youth think that the police, or have this feeling that the police are the biggest gang, or folks that they really don't want to interact with. How do you create that engagement for have youth and police officers to dive into these really vulnerable and sometimes really deep conversations that you were sharing in these peace circles? How do you create that engagement?
I have to say, divine intervention being one of the biggest ones. Please know that as we grew into this, we created this internal team, this movement within the Department of Community Policing personnel who wanted to see something different, specifically those officers that were assigned to work youth events and things like that. So they became the on the ground champions. They became circle keepers. They began to advocate. So you start this by just one conversation at a time, one kid at a time. The way that we were similar to the original project, we had to create opportunities for young people to interface with officers. I am not the avid basketball solves all person. I am not, because I'm not a basketball player. Of course, 5'3", this is the room for me. But we have to create opportunities where the relationship can begin. It's like you have to start somewhere, almost like a first date. So we were able to use basketball. We had a cooking, a healthy cooking aspect. We did some spoken word things. We, had to find out what it is that attracted them. We also had to find out about the officer's ability to keep up. So the creation of opportunities to have that first date for these officers to meet these young people. And then we intentionally, the first 2 weeks, we did that silly stuff. We had the icebreaker games. We had the get to know you games. What's your name? And then we went into storytelling, the process of circle. So I think those are the opportunities that we presented, and people embrace those opportunities.
That's amazing. Those sound like very unique opportunities to build that connection. And like you said, that connection is needed to dive deeper and to be able to create sustainable change within communities and within the relationship between the police department and the larger community.
Yes.
So when you're thinking more broadly, how have you seen Chicago Police Department improve their engagement with the community and even just the relationship with the community through this process?
We introduced and trained over 200 police officers on understanding what practicing a restorative justice peace circle keeper is. Now, is everybody great at it? No. But out of that, you either learned how to hold the space or you learned how to sit in the space, and both are needed. The second thing, and that is still going on, that skill set of officers being able to keep circle, they're using it in different ways from what I've been told. The other thing is understanding the place and the value of youth voice within public safety spaces. Generally, we hear about the youth in television broadcasts and news broadcasts about either they've done something horrid or they're the victim of something being done to them. Never do we ever stop and say, how is it that can they contribute? It's now that paradigm of how we approach youth engagement slowly begin to change. So I have youth engagement officers, or we call them youth liaison officers, asking groups of young people, what is it that you care about? How do you want to see things change? And, what does public safety, what is being safe to you? Honoring their voices, not talking down to them, because, as law enforcement agents, we delve into power and control quite a bit, but not doing that and engaging them in this way. One of the larger things that kind of transcended out of the space of youth engagement into the processes for the Chicago Police Department, which is what we found in our second component, which was the collaboration and the co-creation of strategy, where we use the public participatory dialogue process of World Cafe and Pro Action Cafes. These are processes, dialogue processes that allow groups of people to think together. And, as adults, we pretty much it takes a lot to undo bad behavior. But young people, they gravitated to it simply because they were contributing to their own change. Well, not only did that work for our Bridging the Divide process, but it worked and it's still working within the department as I was under a consent decree. There were policies that had to be changed and we had to do this in collaboration with community. So we began that process with a large undertaking of going across the city and having 4 different meeting processes for allowing not young people, but residents to contribute to things like our use of force, contribute to domestic violence, contribute to youth engagement, contribute to all these different things, their voices. And it's amazing when a citizen or a resident or stakeholder can look at the way our systemic police departments changing and see their voice in that change. Stepping into this third component, which is the leadership part. This is where we fought. We have in each district, we have what we call the district advisory committee or council. And what we have done is taken one of the subcommittees out of that structure and created the youth councils. And it was also supported by our consent decree. Now, this is not that youth council where we have an adult making up all the rules and all this other stuff. We have intentionally, over the last 3 years, worked with our summer jobs program here in Chicago to create this 6-week learning academy, leadership academy for our youth leaders. And what they're doing is they're reaching out to their peers and asking their peers to come and be a part to work for change. Don't just get stuck in what you can't do. Let's find out what you can. So now we have young people sitting at the table with a vote. They, as a committee, they get to vote on things from budgets to programming. They meet with their district commander once a quarter, which is huge. Many of them have never talked, didn't know who the leader of the police officers were in their neighborhoods, right? Of course, they understood the differentiation of the shirts from blue to white, but who are these people? What do they do? So for the last 3 years, those I have identified as leaders understand the structure of the Chicago Police Department and therefore can go to their peers and say, this is how it's set up. This is how you get stuff done. Everybody is not like who you saw on the corner last night, right? So that's still going and growing. This year, they were acknowledged by Apple and some other folks. They got their laptops and they got some tablets, and hopefully by the time our conference rolls around, I can direct you to the site where they're actually sharing their story. That many of them, they blow my mind every time.
Yeah, that's amazing, Vanessa. I'm really hopeful for where Bridging the Divide continues to go, and the way that the Chicago community and the youth will continue to be a part of what is going on and what's to come. So thank you so much for sharing this space with me for the last 30 or so minutes. I really loved hearing about you, about Bridging the Divide, and all the wonderful work that continues to be done in Chicago. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Sydney. I appreciate you greatly.